A wealthy businesswoman walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, confident, dismissive, and ready to bend the rules. Within minutes, her arrogance would collide head-on with one of the most respected judges in America. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Patricia Whitmore interrupted the judge mid-sentence. "I don't have time for this nonsense," she said coldly, eyes still fixed on her phone. Her voice cut through the quiet like a blade of ice. Every head turned. Even the bailiff froze. She had money, status, and power, but none of that would save her from what came next. Before the story unfolds, remember this: only 4% of viewers who watch these courtroom stories are actually subscribed. So if you believe justice and compassion can coexist, hit that button now, because what happens next will remind you that character, not cash, defines who we are, and what followed left the entire courtroom speechless, proving that even the richest woman in the room isn't above the law. Wednesday morning, Providence Municipal Court sunlight spilled across the marble floors, the soft hum of nervous conversation filling the air. Ordinary citizens waited quietly, clutching envelopes and paperwork, parking tickets, small violations, minor mistakes in life. At the bench sat Judge Frank Caprio, calm, collected, his presence both gentle and commanding. His voice, when he spoke, carried warmth rather than intimidation. To the people of Providence, he was more than a judge. He was a listener, a man who measured every case not just by law but by conscience. The bailiff leaned closer and whispered, "Your Honor, next case might be difficult." Caprio glanced at the docket, reading a name that meant little to him at that moment. "Patricia Whitmore," he murmured. Then came the sound, high heels striking tile, crisp and confident. Heads turned toward the doorway. No one in that courtroom expected that the woman walking in next would test Judge Caprio's patience and his principles in such a public, unforgettable way. 48 years old, immaculate in a designer navy suit, diamond earrings glinting under the courthouse lights. A luxury handbag swung from her wrist. Her phone never left her hand. Every movement announced wealth and certainty. Whispers spread across the benches. "Isn't that the CEO of Whitmore Consulting?" Someone muttered. "She's in court." "For what?" Another replied. Patricia Whitmore's reputation preceded her. Wealthy, successful, sharp. In business circles, she was known for closing deals that left others trembling. But today she wasn't entering a boardroom. She was entering a courtroom where ego holds no weight. Her case seemed small on paper. Speeding, 55 in a 30-mile residential zone. But the officer's notes told a story of defiance. Refused to sign the citation, argued for 10 minutes on the roadside, called the limit a joke. Judge Caprio looked up from the file. "Miss Whitmore, please step forward." Patricia sighed audibly. "Can we make this quick? I have actual business to attend to." A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some spectators exchanged glances. Others simply stared, astonished by her tone. Caprio paused. He had faced anger, tears, confusion, but rarely open contempt. "We'll proceed as quickly as we can," he said evenly. "Please approach." She walked forward with deliberate slowness, phone still in hand, fingers tapping. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "you'll need to put that away." She barely looked up. "I'm handling an important matter." "Court is an important matter," he replied. The phone slipped into her purse with an exaggerated sigh. Caprio read from the citation. "You were cited for driving 25 miles per hour over the limit in a residential neighborhood." Patricia crossed her arms. "Those limits are ridiculous. That road is empty. I drive it every morning." He nodded slightly, eyes steady. "Be that as it may, the law sets that limit for safety." "That's absurd," she muttered. A few people near the back shook their heads. Caprio's gaze softened for a moment, then steadied again. "Miss Whitmore, I understand your frustration, but this is a courtroom, not a debate stage. We'll handle this professionally. In a courtroom where humility is respected and honesty rewarded, the truth was about to settle over everyone. Present, Patricia Whitmore was about to learn, something her money had never taught her. Respect can't be. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, eyes calm yet focused. "Miss Whitmore, the citation states you were traveling 25 miles an hour over the speed limit in a residential area. There are schools nearby. Children walk those streets every day." Patricia raised a brow. "Then maybe the parents should teach their kids to stay off the road." A collective gasp swept through the benches. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the judge. Caprio's hands folded gently on the desk. His voice remained steady, but the warmth had cooled. "Miss Whitmore, please be mindful of what you say. The speed limit exists to protect everyone, not just children," she shrugged. "It's still a waste of time. I'll pay the fine and we can all move on." "This court isn't a checkout counter," he said quietly. "It's a place where responsibility meets consequence." Patricia let out a short, sharp laugh. "Responsibility? I'm responsible for 3 companies, over 200 employees. I contribute more to this city's tax base than most people here will see in their lifetimes." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. A man in the back shook his head. Someone whispered, "Unbelievable!" Caprio took a slow breath. "Miss Whitmore's success is commendable, but it doesn't exempt anyone from the law," she smirked. "Laws that punish people for driving too fast on an empty road?" His gaze didn't waver. "Laws that protect lives even when you're in a hurry." Silence pressed in from the walls. The judge's gavel rested motionless, his voice low and even. "I'm asking for your attention and your respect." Patricia lifted her phone again. "Are we almost done?" "I have calls waiting." "Put the phone away," Caprio said. Not raising his tone, she didn't move. The quiet became a hum. "Tense and electric, Miss Whitmore," he said again. "I'm asking you politely, put the phone away." This time she did, though her eyes rolled upward. "Happy now?" Caprio leaned back, the faintest sigh leaving him. "I'd be happier if you understood why you're here." "I'm here because a cop wanted to make quota," she replied. That was the breaking point. A sound like air leaving the room followed her words. "If this story already hits you," the narrator's thought whispered to every watching heart, "to hit that like button, because what Judge Caprio does next proves justice isn't about power. It's about principle." Caprio reached for the folder in front of him and flipped through a stack of papers. "Miss Whitmore, this isn't your first speeding violation." She tilted her head. "So," he read aloud, "3 prior offenses in the last 2 years. 1 for the same stretch of road." "And I paid them all," she interrupted. "That's how this works. You give tickets. I pay them. Transaction complete." Caprio set the file down slowly. "That's not how this works. Each of those tickets represents a moment where you put others at risk. Paying them doesn't erase that." She waved a hand. "You're dramatizing it." His tone sharpened, though it remained controlled. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, when you see flashing lights in your mirror, do you ever think about what could have happened if a child had stepped off that curb?" Patricia's lips tightened. "Nothing happened. Why are we wasting time on hypotheticals?" Caprio's voice grew quieter, steadier, more dangerous for its calm. "Because the law doesn't wait for tragedy to teach you a lesson." The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Even Patricia's confidence wavered for a heartbeat. He opened another page. "Do you know why people respect this court?" She folded her arms. "Because they have to." "No," he said. "Because they choose to. Because they know fairness lives here." His eyes lifted to meet hers. "But fairness is built on respect. And right now you've shown none." Patricia's jaw tightened. "I didn't come here for a lecture. I came here to pay a fine." He nodded once. "You'll pay, Miss Whitmore, but not just with money." A tremor of interest stirred through the benches. Caprio stood, slow and deliberate. "You've mistaken courtesy for weakness. But this courtroom isn't your boardroom. Here, money doesn't buy manners." A few quiet gasps, the shuffle of bodies leaning forward. Someone clapped once before realizing and stopped. The judge's words hit like quiet thunder. Patricia's face flushed, but for the first time her arrogance faltered. He continued, his tone softening but deep with meaning. "My father came to this country with nothing. He worked hard, respected others, and raised his children to believe that decency was worth more than gold. He used to say, 'Son, you don't prove your worth by what you own, but by how you treat people.'" The room seemed to hold its breath. Patricia looked down at the polished wood beneath her hands. The courtroom lights reflected in her eyes. "I didn't mean to be disrespectful," she murmured. Caprio's expression eased. "Then prove it, not with money but with humility." She didn't answer, but something shifted in her posture, a quiet realization replacing her earlier defiance. The judge returned to his seat, opening the folder one final time. "Your fine for this violation is $350. However," he paused, looking directly at her, "given your repeated offenses and your behavior here today, I'm raising it to the maximum $850 plus court costs. Her head snapped up. What? You can't do that. He met her eyes steadily. I can, and I am. You'll also attend a driver safety course within 30 days. A safety course? She repeated, disbelief dripping from every syllable. He nodded once. Yes, because knowledge, unlike arrogance, might save lives. The benches behind her stirred again. Soft applause, muffled agreement. Patricia's face flushed red. This is outrageous. Caprio's tone softened once more. It's justice, Miss Whitmore. Justice with mercy. Because I could fine you more. I could hold you in contempt. But instead I'll offer you something money can't buy, a chance to reflect. She pressed her lips together. For a long moment she said nothing. Then quietly, You're right, he raised an eyebrow. About what? I've been disrespectful, Caprio nodded. And what should you do about that? A pause, then a sigh. I apologize, Your Honor, for my behavior. For my words. Apology accepted, he said gently. The tension began to melt from the air. The crowd exhaled collectively. For the first time since she had entered, Patricia looked small, not in wealth but in perspective. The power suit, the diamonds, the attitude, all seemed to weigh her down. Caprio leaned forward once more. Let me leave you with something to think about. Every person who stands where you're standing today is judged the same. Some have nothing, some have plenty. The law doesn't care about your status. It cares about your actions. Patricia nodded slowly. Understood. He smiled faintly. Good. Because respect, Miss Whitmore, is free to give, and it pays dividends your bank can't match. The gavel tapped lightly. Case closed. As she turned to leave, the room stayed quiet, not out of judgment but reflection. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of understanding, of humility, of quiet respect earned the hard way. Patricia stepped away from the podium slowly, the sound of her heels softer now, less like defiance and more like the weight of realization. As she reached the door, she turned once, just a brief glance toward the man behind the bench. Judge Caprio was already speaking with the next clerk. Calm, kind, unshaken. There was no triumph in his eyes, only purpose, and somehow that stung more than any fine ever could. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the steps. Patricia paused there for a long moment. She pulled her phone from her bag and stared at the black screen. The reflection that looked back at her wasn't the same woman who had walked in an hour ago. For the first time in years, she felt small, not powerless, just human. The wind moved through the trees lining the street. Somewhere behind her, she heard laughter from a group of people leaving the courtroom. Ordinary people, the ones she had once dismissed as insignificant. They weren't talking about her wealth or her company. They were talking about how the judge had reminded them of something simple, that everyone, no matter who they are, answers to the same measure of respect. Inside the courthouse, a few spectators were still whispering to each other. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, one man said. Another woman replied, no, she just saw herself. The footage of the exchange found its way online within hours. The title alone invited curiosity. Judge Frank Caprio teaches arrogant millionaire a lesson in respect. The thumbnail showed Patricia, mid-sentence, eyebrows raised in disbelief, and Caprio looking calm, deliberate. The very picture of patience. By evening, the clip had hundreds of thousands of views. Comments flooded in from every corner of the internet. That judge handled her better than anyone could. He didn't yell. He didn't humiliate. He just showed what real authority looks like. This gave me faith in people again. Patricia saw the clip too. Her assistant texted her the link with a single message. You're going viral. She opened it hesitantly and watched the entire thing from her own words to the moment she apologized. It wasn't the fine that hurt the most. It was seeing herself through other people's eyes. The next morning, she called her office early. I won't be in today, she told her secretary. Are you all right? The woman asked. I think, Patricia said quietly, I need to figure out what that word really means. Days passed, and the noise online began to soften, but Patricia couldn't let it go. She kept thinking about the story the judge told about his father, about integrity, decency, and the way respect could be richer than wealth. 1 week later, she returned to the courthouse not as a defendant, but as a visitor. The clerk at the front desk looked startled to see her. Can I help you? Patricia smiled faintly. I'm here to pay my fine. In person. She handed over the payment in cash, every bill crisp and counted. "And this," she said, sliding an envelope across the counter, "is for the Community Education Fund, for the safety courses." The clerk blinked. "You're donating." Patricia nodded once. "Let's just call it interest on humility." When Judge Caprio heard later that day what she had done, he only smiled. "That's the kind of interest I like to see grow," he said. Weeks turned into months. The video didn't vanish. It lived on, resurfacing whenever conversations about privilege and fairness returned. It wasn't framed as humiliation, but as transformation, because that was what it had become. Patricia began speaking at small business events, not about profit margins or leadership, but about accountability. She told her story without excuses, about how she'd once thought respect was optional. "Turns out," she'd say with a faint smile, "it's the only currency that never loses value." Letters started arriving at the courthouse again, the kind Judge Caprio often kept in a small box in his office. People wrote about how his calm had changed their view of justice, how his patience had reached through a screen and taught them something about dignity. One note, signed simply a reformed driver, read, "You reminded me that humility doesn't make us weak. It keeps us grounded. Thank you for not yelling when you could have. Thank you for teaching instead of punishing." Caprio placed it gently in the box. He had hundreds like it, but each one mattered. Each one was proof that empathy and authority didn't have to be enemies. He often said to visitors who came curious about his philosophy, "The courtroom isn't a place to destroy people. It's a place to help them rebuild." That belief had turned countless moments of conflict into quiet awakenings. Patricia Whitmore's case had simply become another story of how humanity could find its way back, even through arrogance and error. If this story has already reached you, if you believe respect should never depend on what's in your wallet, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs the reminder. Months later, Patricia received an invitation to a local charity event, fundraising for traffic safety awareness, sponsored in part by the Providence Municipal Court. She hesitated, then attended. When she arrived, Judge Caprio was there, surrounded by families and volunteers. He spotted her and smiled warmly. "Miss Whitmore," he greeted her. "Or should I say Patricia?" She returned the smile. "Just Patricia is fine. I wanted to thank you." "You were right. Paying a fine didn't change anything. Learning respect did." Caprio nodded. "Then we both did our jobs that day." They stood quietly for a moment, the noise of laughter and conversation surrounding them. She handed him a small envelope. Inside, a donation check for the same fund she'd given to months earlier, this time much larger. "It's not for publicity," she said. "It's because I mean it." Caprio accepted it with a gentle nod. "The best lessons are the ones we teach ourselves after the gavel falls." Patricia looked around at the people chatting and smiling, the warmth in the room so different from the tension of that courtroom months before. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think I knew what power looked like." Caprio raised an eyebrow. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I know it looks a lot like grace." That night, a local journalist covering the event wrote an article titled, "From Contempt to Compassion, How a Courtroom Changed a CEO." The story spread again, not as a scandal, but as a story of growth. People commented online. She learned the hard way. But she learned, Judge Caprio doesn't hand out punishments, he hands out lessons. Faith in humanity, restored again. And quietly, without any announcement, Patricia began sponsoring the very driver safety program the judge had once assigned her to attend. Her name never appeared on the flyers. The point was never credit. The point was the lesson. In the end, it wasn't a fine that changed her. It was perspective. Patricia Whitmore had walked into that courtroom with power, pride, and no respect. She walked out with a lesson she would remember longer than any speeding ticket. Judge Frank Caprio didn't embarrass her. He educated her. Because the true measure of justice isn't how harshly we punish, but how deeply we teach. Friends, what would you have done in Judge Caprio's place? Do you believe people like Patricia can truly change when given the chance to reflect? Like this video if you believe character is worth more than wealth, and share it if it restored your faith in humanity. Because in the end, the richest thing any of us can own is respect.